If you ever get unwanted attention from someone, it's easy to unfriend them on social media or block their number. But what do you do if you're being physically stalked? That's what I had to deal with when I was 21. I worked at a local restaurant as a waitress, a typical bar and grill. I would say 90% of the customers were regulars. Not a lot of new faces dine here, but on one typical late afternoon, an older man walks in that I've never seen before. Early 60s, dressed nice, and came alone. He introduced himself as David. There was nothing unusual about him or our interaction. I would have totally forgotten about it until later during my shift. While on break, I get a friend request from David on Facebook. I thought it was spam at first until I saw his photo. I immediately thought this was odd behavior. One little interaction and he tracks me down on Facebook? My name tag didn't have my last name on it. How did he find me with just my first name? This didn't sit well with me. I did not accept his request. I worked until close that night. There were 3 of us that locked up and left at midnight. As I was getting in my car, I saw a truck in the parking lot across the street with its engine running. Thought nothing of it until the headlights turn on as I drive away. Now the truck is on the road as well. It's keeping its distance from me, but copying every turn I make. My apartment is a 5-minute drive from work. I'm almost home, and the truck is still behind me, keeping approximately a 200-yard distance. Once I arrive, I rush to get into my apartment, hoping the person in the truck doesn't see what number I go into. Once I'm inside, I look through the peephole. I see the truck pull up slowly behind my car, stops for 30 seconds, and then drives away. I could hear my heart pounding. I had no clue who that could have been or why. I couldn't see who was driving. I didn't know anyone that drove a truck. Some of my questions seemed to be answered the next day at work. Around 5 o'clock, David, that sent me a friend request, comes in and sits in my section. Once again, everything was normal, up until he's about to leave. He asks me, "Why don't you want to be my friend?" I played dumb and pretended I didn't know what he was talking about. He mentions the friend request. I say, "I don't really use Facebook." That's when he leaned into me and said, "I don't believe you," and then proceeds to leave the restaurant. I watched him leave and noticed he drove a truck. It appeared similar to the truck from last night, but couldn't be sure because of how dark it was. I told my boss to never put David in my section ever again. He agreed. That didn't matter though, because David never came back into the restaurant. But I did see him again, many times. I would see him at the grocery store, the mall that I would go to get my nails done, even at a concert that I went to. Every time though, he kept his distance from me, that it seemed like he just so happened to be in the same place by coincidence. He would never talk to me or do anything. I would spot him and usually leave as soon as I could. But one day I saw him in the grocery store and I completely lost it. I had seen him so many times and I just flipped out. I walked up to him and yelled at him to leave me alone and to get the hell away from me and to stop following me everywhere I go. I caused a huge scene. Everyone nearby stopped what they were doing and stared at us. David seemed just as surprised as the other shoppers. Once I was done yelling at him, letting off my frustration, David said quietly to me, "Wrong move, bitch," then quickly leaves the store, dropping his grocery basket of bananas and oatmeal. I was actually proud of myself for standing up to him, but what he said to me really stuck with me. It sounded like a threat, and it was. I'm sure most of the people hearing this are wondering why I hadn't called the police yet. 2 reasons. I was young and naive, and I'm the type that tries to handle things on their own. But eventually, I did call the police. Something deep down was alerting me to danger. 2 months pass after the grocery store incident, and I haven't seen David at all. I actually forgotten about the whole thing until on another night that I closed the restaurant, locked the place up at midnight, and drove home. Just as I was about to turn into my apartment complex, my jaw drops, and I'm overwhelmed with anxiety as I see David's truck parked on the street 50 yards away from my apartment. I know it's his truck because it has the same Marine Corps bumper sticker on the right side, a small detail I remember seeing the last time he was in the restaurant. I decided not to turn into the complex. I slowly drive by David's truck and look over. It's empty. There's nobody inside. So where could David be, I thought. Realizing he most likely knows where I live, I second-guessed going home. I live alone and on the first floor. No roommate to warn me of a break-in, and being on the first floor seemed like an easy target. I'm sitting in my car thinking what I should do, and I remember the last thing David said to me. Those were the words of a man that didn't think this was all over. Looking at my front door, everything seemed normal, but I wasn't taking any chances anymore. I called the police and reported a possible break-in. 2 officers arrived and I explained the situation. I gave one of them the keys to my front door and let them know that there was an entrance to the back, a sliding glass door. They both split up to investigate as I waited outside. When the officer opened my front door, I heard yelling and a loud commotion coming from the back. The officer rushes to help his partner. Inside my apartment, waiting for me, was David. He had knocked the handle off on the sliding glass door. My instincts were right. The police tased him and arrested him. Backup was called and more officers arrived. The complex was overrun with flashing lights. I couldn't believe this was all for me. Police discovered David with rope, duct tape, a knife, and a bunch of sleeping pills. He was waiting for me to get home from work and ambush me. And based on everything that he brought with him, it sickens me to think what he would have done. David pled guilty and was given a long sentence that allows me to sleep at night. If I could say the 2 things that I've learned from this experience, it's don't avoid asking for help. I should have called the police a long time before I did. At least file a report or something. And second, trust your gut. Even if you think you might be crazy, you've been given survival instincts for a reason. I know it saved my life. As a male in his late 40s, I never thought I would have a stalker, but I did. It caused many sleepless nights and difficulty for my marriage. It's hard to put in words what it's like having a person trying to systematically destroy your life. Here's my story. I was 47, 2 kids, and a wife of 22 years. I have also been a real estate agent for 10. In the summer of that year, I sold many homes, one of them being to a client named Becky. Becky was early 30s and good looking. Becky was also single. I only know this because she would always mention it to me. Even after I sold the home to her, she would still text me asking me about other properties. I suspected she wasn't really interested in the properties, but more so me. But I kept it professional as I could, at first. After hundreds of messages back and forth, and the messages becoming more and more personal and nothing to do with real estate, I referred her to another agent in the office because I was unable to help her with what she was looking for. This is when things took a turn. She lashes out at me, speaking with her on the phone this time, calling me names and telling me what a piece of shit I am. I eventually hung up on her, hoping this was the end of that, but it was just the beginning. 2 days go by, and our office director, Michelle, calls me into her office and tells me she's received a call from Becky saying that I have been sexually harassing her. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe she would lie to this extent, and I assumed to have me fired. Michelle and I have worked together for 10 years and knows me very well. She had a hard time believing Becky's story, but Michelle said, to be safe and judicious, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna suspend you until I can investigate this further. I told Michelle everything, and it was all a lie. She said she believed me, but to be safe, needed to do her due diligence. I reluctantly agreed. I went home and decided not to tell my wife, a decision I would later regret. I hoped this would all blow over in a couple of days and everything would go back to normal. In the meantime, I told my wife I would work from home the next week or so. The next day, I was alerted from a coworker that several people have been posting on the company Facebook page that I was a sexual deviant and should be in jail. It was from multiple accounts that had no friends and only one photo. Dummy accounts I'm sure Becky made. My coworker would delete them as soon as they saw them. 2 days into the suspension, Becky called me. My wife was out, so I answered, hoping to get some sort of peace treaty. But she kept calling me names and even started calling my wife names. I told her to stop what she's doing, hung up and blocked her number. The next morning, my wife heads out the door to go to work. She immediately comes back in with tears rolling down her face. When I ask what's wrong, she just looks at me and holds up a letter. It was a typed letter from Becky, placed underneath my wife's windshield wiper, saying that she's been having an affair with me, and my wife believed it. It broke my heart seeing her think that I could betray her like that. I had to come clean with everything, including the fact that I've been suspended from my job. She cried even more after confessing that I lied to her, making it even more difficult for her to believe me that I was not having an affair. My wife didn't go to work that day. We had a long, honest conversation, and eventually she understood and said she believed me. That was a huge weight off my shoulders. We discussed for a while what we were going to do about Becky, but things came to a head later that night. Our 17-year-old daughter had a volleyball game that night at the high school. My wife and I attended, trying to get away from all the drama. Not even 10 minutes into the game, Michelle from the office walks into the gym with a concerned look on her face. Michelle also had a daughter that was on the volleyball team. She walked directly to my wife and I and said that she saw someone messing with my car. We all three ran out to the parking lot. The car was fine. No windows busted, nothing taken. The car was still locked. Michelle said that it appeared to be a female, and she was also underneath the car. I pulled out my flashlight and started looking for something. At first, I thought maybe the brake lines were cut. To be honest, I know nothing about cars and wouldn't know where to check, but after 5 minutes of looking around, I found what I was looking for. Just underneath my front grille was a GPS tracker. Jesus Christ, this woman is crazy. I held it up to Michelle and said, "You see what I'm dealing with?" In case Michelle didn't remember what Becky looked like, I showed her a picture on my phone. She says that might have been who she saw underneath the car, but can't be sure. I alone drove to the police station to file a report. I also sought legal advice the next day. After presenting a pile of evidence to the court of habitual harassment, Becky was served with a no-contact order and not allowed within 500 yards of me. I was hoping for a harsher punishment, but as long as she was out of my life, I was all right with that. The harsher punishment arrived a little later. Becky actually showed up to my house at night and slashed my wife's tires. I rushed to the window when I heard the first pop and took some photos. That was enough evidence for her to be arrested. She received 30 days in jail and 90 days of house arrest. I think that's when she finally learned her lesson, because it's been 3 years now, and I've been 100% Becky free. I was very lucky to have an understanding wife through all of this, and an understanding boss as well. I was back to work right after I discovered the tracker. What I've learned from all of this is, it's crazy how crazy people can be.